Hearty welcome to our communities tonight. Thank you for showing up. And so we will be guided in a fruitful conversation around policing in schools with an emphasis on the school to prison pipeline this evening. And without further ado, I will let our presenters for this evening introduce themselves. And while they're introducing themselves, I will be preparing the presentation. So whoever would like to start.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Letha Muhammad. I'm the Director of Education Justice Alliance, which is based in Wake County. We're a grassroots community-based organization working to dismantle the school to prison pipeline and the school to deportation pipeline within Wake County Public Schools and to stop the criminalization of Black and brown young people. Happy to be here with you all and hoping we can share some information with you that can help you join this fight with us. Thank you. Jakob, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name is Jakob Lemma. I am the co-founder of the Wake County Black Student Coalition. We are a student-led organization, and we are dedicated to ending systemic racism within our own education systems and trying to make it true equity for all students.
Hi, this is Fernando Martinez. I'm the campaign or organizing director for the Education Justice Alliance. I have the privilege of working with Letha and other parent and other community leaders for a long time, pushing back against the criminalization of Black and brown families. More specifically, we are trying to dismantle the school to prison and the school to deportation pipeline by pushing for 3 specific community organizations campaign that I could share at a later time with you guys, but I'm honored of being here tonight.
Yes, it's your turn.
All right. Hey, Tyler Wittenberg. I am Chief Counsel for the Justice Systems Reform with Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And we are more than happy to provide movement lawyering support to these wonderful advocates on the ground, these wonderful young folks, and to help in any way that we can support the movement for police-free schools in both Wake County and Durham.
This is Fernando again. You just heard me a few minutes ago. For today's conversation, we would like to we're going to start pretty soon with a short poll. We want to see who we're talking to and what your experience have been. We will next share with you some of the definitions that we use when we refer to some of the terms. And then it's important to set the historic background and overview on how we got to this place, you know. So we're gonna share a little bit of the history of police in the schools, and we will look into the statewide statistics or data. After that, we will hear from a student in Wake County, from the Black Student Coalition in Wake County, and go back to revisit the data for Wake and Durham County, because it's where we kind of focus and have been supporting these campaigns. Not to say that other school districts are not facing the same type of challenges, but we're gonna focus on Wake County and Durham County when it comes to some of the numbers for the purpose of this conversation. And then we will share some of the proposals we have to solve this problem of criminalizing young people in the schools. That's pretty much what we have for today. I hope we can have an opportunity at the end to have a conversation and potentially identify other topics or answer some of the other questions that you may have. So the results are there. In this conversation, in this group, we have about 80% of participants that had some form of police when they attended the school, and 17% that didn't. Some comments on the chat box that some people say no, but they attended high school in the 70s. So, and other people said they also had SROs when they were in the 70s in the school of 72. Interesting. So that actually kind of set the stage for the conversation, and now we know that most of the people had some form of police in the schools when they attended the schools, 82%. Next question. So 98%, wow, you're my people, believe that students should not be arrested for having a water balloon fight in a school, and 2% say depends. And one of the reasons we asked this question is because in Wake County, some time ago, I think it's almost 6 years ago, I think it was 2014, at Enloe High School, which is a high school where they have this tradition of having a water balloon fight at the end of the school year. So some rumors, took place around some things that people were saying the students put in the balloons, and it was a big scandal where they called the police. Somehow they kind of tried to push back against the tradition that they had of having this water balloon fight, and they called the police on some students, and 5 students and parents were arrested at Enloe High School for having the water balloon fight, which was a tradition at that particular high school. So this is just to show you, and we will talk more about that later, that how we criminalize young people. Push out. Push out is a term they use to identify the practices and some policies that the school system have that contribute to pushing the student out of the academic track into the school to prison pipeline. They like to claim that, and they keep statistics on dropout rates, and dropout rates basically put the responsibility on the student and the family and the parents. But we know for sure that school districts as systems have a lot of policies that actually contribute to pushing the students, and oftentimes they have lack of policies because they don't have things in place to help the student to stay in a school, or they don't provide the help that they need to stay in a school. So we refer that as a push out. Yes, people have come across to families who have experienced some sort of discrimination or have been victim of these push out policies. 74% of the participants have know somebody or have experience with that, and only 26% not. So thank you so much for engaging in that poll conversation. And this is kind of like help us to set the stage on who we're talking this evening with. And we're gonna move to the next slide. So for the purpose of this conversation, the Education Justice Alliance defined a school to prison pipeline as a set of school policies and practices in which students are, again, pushed out of the schools into the juvenile and criminal justice system. And some people have other definitions, but this is the shorter definition, and this is the more specific one that we like to use. And now we start seeing the results of those push-out practices and policies with some undocumented families that are actually being put in contact with immigration and custom enforcement, con la migra, with ICE, or sometimes I refer to the immigration system. So we call the school to deportation pipeline to those policies and practices, whether they are in the book or not, that are actually contributing to pushing the students out of the school system into the juvenile criminal justice and eventually into immigration procedures that could be led to the deportation process, or they actually put at risk the family of being put in a deportation processes. And I don't know if we're gonna have a conversation at a later time about the intersection of criminal justice and immigration, the immigration system, but that's another conversation that we need to have when we talk about putting families in that risk because of the school practices and policies. With that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Felicia dropped in the chat that actually that conversation's happening on Thursday. So tune in on Thursday to dig a little deeper into that particular issue.
Thank you so much. I didn't see the chat box. And then I'm gonna call my friend Tyler to help me to take it from here with the history, please.
Peace, everyone. If we can go to the next slide. I'll try to be fairly quick and fairly concise with history of school policing. First and foremost, this report we came to learn, it's a effort that took a good amount of time, and it has a huge section on the history of school policing. So if there's anything that you feel like you want to learn more about that maybe I'm glossing over, I would encourage you to check out the report, and it's wecametolearn.com is where you can find it. And there's an action kit that goes with it as well. And that's really where I'm pulling from. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We go on to the next one. 3 main takeaways with this history of school policing. 1, it is inextricably linked to the oppression of Black and brown students, the criminalization of Black and brown students, and attempts to suppress civil rights or students protesting for their own civil rights. Number 2, it reflects a belief and a practice that is tied to the prison industrial complex that Black youth and Black and brown youth in particular need to be controlled and intimidated, right? And 3, it does not prevent mass shootings. What it does do is increase arrest of Black and brown students for minor behaviors, and it helps create a toxic learning environment. All those things are research-based. It has never prevented a mass shooting. And so we want to separate and debunk the myth that we have police in schools because of Columbine. Columbine gave a reason for investment in policing, right? They were able to find millions and millions after Columbine, millions and millions after Parkland. But we've been asking for millions and millions to support us, and that money's still missing. So I just want to get those 3 things out the way. All right, and we can go on. So, what is the beginning of school policing? As I mentioned, during the early 1950s and into the 1960s, you have a rise of student protests that coincides with the civil rights movement. You have the Chicano movement in LA and those student walkouts. You have student protests in Philadelphia, student protests in Baltimore that really are kind of the backbones for the civil rights movement in those cities. And it is no coincidence that all 3 of those cities now have their own school police departments. And those school police departments formed shortly after. And it is a way, and it also ties into integration, a way to protect property and unrest and promote safety in these schools. We know what that means. That's code language for keeping Black and brown students away from and protected from Black students who are simply trying to have the same access to a quality education as all other students. And so the war on drugs also comes into play. At this time, we start to move. Nixon and his aide have this idea that, well, we don't want them to vote. We don't want them to be even economically viable. So we're going to criminalize extensively the use, the possession of drugs, and even really, we're going to equate drugs with people of color. And that creeps its way into the classroom as well. It breaks up families, breaks up communities, and adds to this proliferation of incarceration throughout the United States, which we know as mass incarceration. And so, we can move on one more. With this proliferation of incarceration within the United States, what we call mass incarceration, we can go to the next one. We start to see a rise in criminalization altogether, but of course, of young people as well, and of youth in school. So the war on drugs creeps its way into the classroom. You have DARE, which is a little bit later, so maybe not as linear, but DARE, which actually increased the amount of experimentation and use of drugs. You have Gang Task Force, and clearly looking at youth and schools serving youth of color, which introduced police officers to the classroom as mentors, as educators, right? We really know why they're there, to reflect the same carceral state and the same level of policing that exists in these communities. One thing I want to specifically point out is the 1033 program, which comes around the early 90s, where you have the government and the military selling, really giving military equipment to local law enforcement, and this includes those same school districts who have their own police department. So you have the Los Angeles School Police Department receiving a tank, grenade launchers, and M16s. And I'm going to take another non-linear jump and just say that ended up being a major victory for the Labor Community Strategy Center later on, as they made all those things. They made the school district return all those things. And you also have the Guns Free Schools Act. So this is the beginning of zero tolerance. So we had police in school before we had the zero tolerance piece. Just want to point that out. But with zero tolerance, you also have a mandate that if you have guns or anything used as a weapon, a pencil, a book that's thrown, or if you have any form of drugs, it could be a small amount of drugs, that now it has to be turned over to the police department. The school, in this instance of local, can't necessarily exercise this local control of, all right, we're going to deal with the youth in a way that reflects healthier disciplinary measures. We actually are just going to refer them to the police. And at this very same time, you have a rise in Black and brown youth within the juvenile justice system. A very stark rise. And we can move on. NASRO, National Association for School Resource Officers, is formed, where now you have a group of people who are, it's basically similar to a union of sorts, where we're going to support school police officers and try to train them on the best way to criminalize Black and brown youth. And you can see in the picture there what they look like. And today we see a lot of SROs end up being more folks of color, but please believe it is the same structure, the same poison that they're feeding you, just a different, a different cover on the book. All right, so we can go forward from there. And you have this super predator narrative coming up in the mid-90s, as well as this rise of fear of gangs, quote unquote. So the super predator narrative is this idea that Hillary supported, that Donald Trump supported, that says the children of folks who have drug addictions are so harmful, they're so out of their mentality that they are beyond repair. Do you also see a rise in direct files at this time? The rise of prosecuting young Black and brown folks as adults. And really it's all driven through the schools at this point. Central Park 5 happens around this time, and you get this horrible super predator narrative. At the same time, you get Columbine. So while we're super predators, other folks just have mental health issues. So you get Columbine that happens, your first major school shooting, and they use that as an opportunity to fund more school police. So it doesn't begin the school policing movement, but it absolutely helps to fund it. So I don't want to undermine the role that Columbine played and the role that Parkland and other acts still play. But they weren't the catalyst, and it is absolutely tied to the oppression of Black and brown folks. So you get Columbine, and at this similar time, you get No Child Left Behind. And so when we talk about prison industrial complex, when we talk about the harms of school policing and the carceral state within the school building, we also need to talk about testing and this idea that, okay, if they're low on test scores, we're going to take away money from them and add police in the building. And so you wonder why certain schools look the way they do. They have been underfunded and they've been underfunded and excessively policed. And a lot of these things we see as deliberate. And that's why it takes our deliberate action to come out of it. At the same time, you have a rise in this concept of the school to prison pipeline. Now we're naming it. And so you have advocates, I'm sure some of which are on the call, who are now stepping in to say, we want to end this connection between the education system and the carceral state. And the victory that came out of that was the federal support. There was a school discipline initiative that Obama put out, or other folks helped support the implementation of that. Of course, it was rescinded when we got Trump in office. And many schools actually did rely on that to try to reduce their suspension expulsions and their arrests. But we also started to see some victories on our end. And this kind of goes back to that victory with the 1033 program. And because I'm not trying to stress the point too much, let's go to the next one. And so I really think that where we are around this 2013 stage is really where we are now, absent the victories that we've seen recently. With this kind of spur of police-free schools victories. Right now we see that, millions of youth, of students, especially students of color, more often students of color attend schools with more police, or simply police, but no counselors, where there are millions and millions of dollars spent on school policing, where it's seen as something that's okay. It's just a part of the program. And a big part of this for me is that we focused on data a lot, and we use this period to collect data and put the data out about the disparities in discipline, the disparities in arrest. But the movements and the victories that we've achieved, they come about from folks being on the ground, not just that data, right? So we still have this same data, and we still want to put it out there, but it really takes folks on the ground like Jakob, folks on the ground like Lita and Fernando to really make a lot of this stuff happen. And so we're able to create an analysis around school to prison pipeline, create some literature around school to prison pipeline, and we can go on to the next one, and start to develop more strategies. And one of those strategies being the Assault Act campaign, which can also be found on that website, where we just started to document all these instances of abuse of students of color at the hands of school police officers. I encourage folks to check out the site, and as you can see, we've documented 4 just from the research we've done in North Carolina, but we know there are many more. And the fact that we've been able to document it has more to do with the invention of cell phone cameras, has more to do with access to cell phone cameras than it does to do with an increase in these instances happening. And so we find ourselves there today in a situation where I think, building off of George Floyd, folks are recognizing the work that a lot of folks have put in throughout the United States, whether you're talking about Oakland, Denver, here in Wake, and people are starting to heed the call of police-free schools. And with that said, I will pass it on. I appreciate y'all.
Before I just talk briefly about the statewide data, I just want to add to what Tyler said, right? That this work that organizers and organizations, parents and students have been doing for many years, right, to remove police from schools isn't new work. And I think it's important always to lift that up and to continue to lift that up, because what oftentimes happens in times of where, you know, incidents happen or times of great change and we start to see things happening, we can sometimes get caught up in the moment of things and not recognize the long-standing work that has been done for years by organizations and people who are directly impacted by policing in schools and the school to prison pipeline to remove police. And so I really appreciate the organizers of this event who are, you know, really looking at what it means to defund police, you know, from our communities, inviting us into this space so that we can make this connection between defunding police in our communities and defunding them in our schools, removing them, right, from our schools. So just wanted to lift that up. So we thought that since we're in North Carolina, it would be appropriate to look at school policing statewide as kind of like a way to set the tone. And so this data is from 2017. And really, what it really shows you, right, is the racism that's inherently built into this system of school police in schools. In 2017, there were 10 Black youth incarcerated for every 1 white youth incarcerated in North Carolina. So that's a 10-to-1 ratio. And during the 2018-2019 school year, 45% of the delinquency complaints in North Carolina originated from schools. So that tells us, right, like literally that schools are feeding the school to prison pipeline, that this isn't some catchy phrase or, you know, something we didn't coin because it's cute. No, it's actually a reality, right? And it's the lived experience of so many young people and their families, because you can't disconnect the experience, right? If it happens to my child, and I have 2, you know, high schoolers, it happens to me too. If they're suspended or subsequently arrested in school and pushed out, then the impact is not only felt by the student, but it's also felt by the parent. And so I think it's important for us to, when we think about solutions and even naming problems, that we name the impact, and the impact is on young people and on their families. The data on this slide, I hope you all can see it. It's a little small, but it just gives you a greater view of the enrollment in school-based delinquency complaints based on race. And I dare you, wherever you're at, right, to go look at the data for your district. And what you will find, I know you will find that there is going to be a disparity in that data. And more often than not, Black students with brown students coming up right behind them are the ones that are most directly impacted by these arrests, but also suspensions and expulsions too. And I think it's Tyler said something earlier. Oh, when you were talking about when the law went into place and how they took control away from schools and then were able to criminalize young people. So it's still happening, but what has, I think, changed or shifted in the last, 10 plus years is that the ways in which Black and brown students are then targeted, and then their white counterparts are given a pass. Like I have so many stories of Black kids suspended or arrested, right, for marijuana or the smell of marijuana, where white kids are given a pass, right? The school resource officer caught the kids smoking and was like, oh no, I'll let y'all go this time. So all of this contributes to the school to prison pipeline, and also contributes to why we're calling for the removal of school resource officers. Next slide, please. Jakob, I'm turning it so appropriate that we have a young person to share his experience and the experiences of his peers. So go ahead, Jakob.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, all right, cool. Thank you. Special shout out to Education Justice Alliance for inviting me. Because so many times a student's voice is always undermined, right? And so many times we're just considered too young. We don't know what we're talking about. But 10 times out of 10, we know what we're talking about because we are the ones that are being affected. And in fact, we should be included in, along with the Board of Education. The Board of Education should even consider a student position. But I'll get into that another time. So I am a co-founder of the Wake County Black Student Coalition, and it was founded by me and my partner, Victoria Smith. She was unable to make it, but so how this organization essentially formed was because of the abolition of SROs, right? We saw this movement and we wanted to get on it. You know, we felt like we are two young leaders and we want this to happen. And the reason why we want the abolition of SROs is because they hurt way more than they are supposed to protect, right? They attack the youth, they attack minorities. And the reason why SROs were put into place for the first place was to essentially protect the students before like school shootings, right? But not at all in the past 20 years has a single SRO have stopped a school shooting, right? Not a single one. Like over 180 school shootings happened and not a single one stopped it. And so if they are not doing their jobs, why are we funding them so much money? And why are we not funding our therapists and our counselors, right? I go to Enloe High School, and there is 2,500 students, and there's only 5 counselors for us all, right? And so that means each counselor has a set of 400 to 500 students. And so where can I go to talk about my mental health issues? And where can I go to talk to someone that needs it, right? School needs to be a place of love. And I feel like that's such an undermined thing, right? We're expected to go learn and do all this stuff, but how can we go to a place that does not care about me, right? I'm already getting racially profiled in my gas stations. I'm already getting racially profiled in like while I'm playing basketball. I've gotten searched for weed, and I've never smoked a day in my life. I would never smoke. I've never smoked a day in my life, but I was searched by my own school resource officer. So many kids have been arrested by my own SRO just because of their color of their skin. Freshman year in our civics and economics class, our officer, SRO, had to make a presentation about how he does his arrests. And one of the things he said, and I quote, he says, the reason why my Black teen arrests are so high is because most Black people smoke weed, and white people, they're the ones that they just have like pills. I can't smell pills, but I can smell marijuana. What? You can get arrested for just smelling like weed. Smelling, right? No proof. They don't need any proof. But if they say that you smell like weed, they can't arrest you, right? And they're not affected. This is why they're dangerous, right? It's so unsafe to go to my gas station. It's so unsafe to make small little trips and walks. I'm scared to go play outside. I'm scared to go to school. It's not right. We need to take these SROs, we need to defund them and refund our schools, right? We need to invest in our social workers. We need to invest in our mental health advocates, right? So many times we think, okay, so if we need to get these criminals out of our schools, okay, let's think, why are they criminals? What happens to them at home? What do they have a loving relationship with their parents? Can they get their meals at home? Are they being fed? What's going on? You know, it's ridiculous how we can just jump to conclusions just based off someone's skin, and we're so often criminalized because we are Black. And I'm tired of being criminalized. I'm tired of being this angry Black kid whenever I talk about this subject, because it matters. Of course, it doesn't matter to anyone else because they cannot relate to these same experiences. But this now is the perfect time to get the WCPSS to listen to us. This is why the Wake County Black Student Coalition was formed in the first place. Now, why are students doing their job for them? Don't you think, shouldn't the Board of Education listen to their students in the first place? Shouldn't they care about their students? Why is it a consideration? Why do they say, I'll think about it? Thinking about it is not going to save me when I get racially profiled. It's not. And I say this with full emotion. You know, I'm talking from my heart right now. Schools need to be a place for love. Like I already said, we don't know how to handle our stress. We don't know how to handle our anxiety. We are getting racially profiled by our own teachers. Teachers are not getting the accountability that they need. Teachers need to learn how to give us care too. We're seeing them on a daily basis. I see my teachers more than I see my parents. I see the SRO more than I see my parents. I do not want to go to a place where I'm scared all the time. The WCBSC was created on behalf of all students of color, and we're trying to give a platform for us to speak on. And abolition of SROs is our first demand, our very first demand. This is what we need. We cannot afford this to be a consideration. We cannot afford to keep stalling. We need this to happen immediately before more people get emotionally traumatized. I'm emotionally traumatized from the Wake County schools, from Wake County public school systems. I'm tired, and this is one of the biggest things. And I don't know if you guys paid attention to this meeting or what happened yesterday. We actually held our own online event, a social media takeover on Twitter, and on Twitter we eventually reached #2 trending Black Students Matter in all of the whole state, North Carolina, #2 trending. And this today, it was against Plan B. Plan B was they were talking about the reopening of schools. So we wanted them to go close down immediately, like every single school, just shut it down, because we need to keep people safe, right? Minorities are going to be the ones that are most affected by the coronavirus. And despite the tagging, despite us getting #2 trending, they still didn't listen to us. At the board today, they announced that they are doing Plan B with transition, right? What does that mean? Why are you even considering reopening schools if you're having your own meetings through Zoom? What sense does that make? What sense does that make? And why are they not valuing our voice? Why are we being silenced? Because we don't know what we're talking about. Oh, he's too young. We're going to show them. This Saturday, we are holding our own, this is our 3rd student protest. We already held 2 against SROs. We already held 2. This is our 3rd student protest. This Saturday at Enloe High School, 11 a.m., we're trying to get many people as possible, because Wake County needs to hear us. We need them to listen. And with that, I'll pass it on. Thank you so much.
Yes. What would it take for the school boards to listen? I just keep thinking, like, we have been organizing, campaigning. We have used multiple strategies, multiple conversations. We attend board meetings, workshop meetings. We have community meetings. We meet at coffee shops with board members. We meet with superintendent, and we have held press conferences and protests and rallies outside of Wake County Public Schools. And I was just reflecting on how long it takes to even be listened to. And I'm just thankful for and honored to be working side by side with young leaders. And I was just thinking about that the time is now. I mean, like, we must keep fighting. But yes, Lita, you're next. I'm sorry.
No, that was appropriate and right on time, because I was going to also, shout out. Yeah, we appreciate you, Jakob, for being here and for telling your story, and even through, the trauma and the pain, right? And that's the other piece, as a Black person in this country, right, that experiences racism, we oftentimes still have to show up and do our jobs or go to school and just endure. And so I just really appreciate you naming the pain and the fear and the hurt that you have experienced as a young person, that we should all be appalled by, that we should be upset by, that we should be energized by, to connect with you all in your work, and to stand alongside you all to continue to call for the removal of school resource officers. But also, Jakob, if you don't mind, you all have some other demands, and I would love for you to, before I move to the next slide, for you to share the other demands, because I think it's still appropriate as a part of this conversation.
You can still hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay, thank you. So obviously, you know, abolition of SROs is a big part of who we are. That's our number one demand. We need to remove police from schools and invest in student-driven alternatives to policing, therapists, you know, mental health advocates, all this other stuff. Number two is staff accountability, right? We need to hold staff accountable for racist, sexist, homophobic, and demeaning acts and statements. Students need these records to be public as well, right? We need to understand and know who's teaching us and who they really are and what they have done. And we need the staff accountability system. We need schools to implement that. And number three is having a place for people of color students to speak, right? This is basically our idea of a Wake County Black Student Coalition chapter at each school, right? Providing students of color with decision-making authority over policies that impact their education. And we demand a student advisory board over Wake County, right? We need the students, because the students' name or the students' voice is so silenced when it comes to the Board of Education. And number four is a safe and organized system to report sexual harassment of any kind. We need to create a safe, transparent, and accessible way for students to report sexual harassment. It's such a big thing that goes undermined, especially with principals, not only in Wake County, but like national. This should be like a national thing, and it should be taken very serious. And number five is to integrate Black and Indigenous history into all curriculums. Although, you know, America was built on the backs of Black people, right? Our history did not start or end with slavery. We need to teach the truth. And this land, it was taken from Indigenous people. And it's only right that we teach all the history, right? Our history classes have been so whitewashed, right? It's just like my AP World History class, and I took on sophomore year. We didn't learn nothing about Africa. We learned about Mansa Musa. That's it. We had one page in the textbook about Africa. That's it. In my History of the Americas class, it's supposed to be history of the Americas, meaning North America and South America. And we always talking about like how we're just talking about like the white, you know, white heroes, right? The white Confederate heroes, and we glorify them, right? And we need to teach the right things. We need to teach what actually happened. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but yes, okay, so Hitler, right? We have Hitler, right? He committed mass genocide, 6 million Jews almost, right? Or something around that number. There was this man, and I don't know his name, right? He killed, I think he was Italian, he killed 10 million Africans. 10 million, somebody can look that up. 10 million Africans, mass genocide. I don't even know his name. And I blame our education system for that, right? Why am I having to do my own research on my history? Why am I having to like learn all my history from like Twitter and social media apps? I have learned about so much stuff in our own area. Did you guys know there was a Wilmington massacre? I didn't know about that since like 2 weeks ago. Why haven't I learned about that in my classrooms? Why is everything being silenced? Why is Black history being silenced? Yes, that 1 month is cool, but I want this like all year. I want this in a year-round thing. This should, you know, Black history, it needs to be important. I'm tired of it getting erased by the curriculum. So those are our 5 demands.
Thank you for sharing. And I really love the last demand, because what you're really talking about is creating a curriculum that actually speaks to our experience, right? And what would that do to shift and shape the environment in schools? How much more welcome would young people, Black and brown young people, feel if the curriculum was reflective of their experience? So I appreciate you again for sharing. So this next slide is on school policing in Durham and Wake. And y'all, I have a confession. My eyes are over 40 and I am struggling to read these numbers. Yeah, so I don't know if one of my partners can see it a little better than me, and I'm supposed to read this out, but help me out, somebody, please.
So what it's demonstrating here is that it's comparing enrollment to the referrals to the justice system. So in Wake County, you have 22% of enrollment of Black students, but there's 73% of every student who's referred to the justice system. So, when you couple that with a lot of stuff that Jacob's talking about, they're not going to teach you the truth. They're going to alienate you in your classroom, and they're going to send you to the justice system. So it's no wonder that students are pushed out or simply don't want to show up, and because they feel a certain way within that space. And if you look at the white students in Wake County, 45% of enrollment, 16% of those being referred to the justice system. And there's data that we know for a fact that Black, white, brown students, race does not dictate any level of misbehavior, period. So there's no reason for this except for the systemic racism that exists within policing, and clearly, as Jacob has demonstrated, within our education system as a whole. In Durham, it is 43% of school enrollment and 86% of those sent to the justice system. And if you take a look at the Durham piece, 0 white students referred to the justice system from school. 0. Now you tell, all right, I'll stop. But that don't, come on. I'm done. I'm sorry. You got it.
I appreciate your eyes. Thank you, Tyler, stepping in for me. Yeah, so it just, when you look at these numbers, right? I like numbers, but I also like experience. And so when I look at these numbers and then I listen to Jacob tell his story, right, of being racially profiled within his school, then these numbers make sense, right? When I listen to Jacob talk about the lack of representation in the curriculum that he is subject to in public schools, these numbers make sense. When I look at the numbers for Durham and 0 white kids are referred, right? That also, it makes sense, right? If the curriculum that young people are digesting and that teachers are teaching inherently lift up one group over another, right, as more accomplished, as of what they've contributed to this society, right? It also then skews people's thought processes about who has value and who doesn't. So then you get the disparities that we're looking at in this data. You get cops, right, school police officers or school resource officer who are oftentimes Black people themselves, right, who will discriminate, right, or racially profile kids that could be their kids, right, in a way that they don't do their white counterparts, because we in this country, you know, are fed, spoon-fed since, you know, we arrived here, this notion of, you know, whiteness and the greatness of whiteness, and then this notion of Black or brown folks and this idea of criminalizing or that we're criminals. And so, you know, one of the things that we want to make sure we do in this particular webinar, right, is to debunk those myths. That's the whole purpose, right, to dismantle this idea of somehow we're inherently bad, to push back, and we use data and stories to do that. And I think Jacob said earlier, in the last 20 years or so, there hasn't been any data, right, that supports that school resource officers actually have stopped a school shooting, because that's actually the narrative that they push, right, to make us feel like this is something that we need. And so, you know, one thing we want to encourage all of us, all of you all here listening and participating, right, is to be radical in your imagination of what a new world could be for us. So a new world in our communities, but a new world in our school. Like, what is it that we deserve? To Jakob's point, young people deserve a space where they feel loved and supported and taken care of, right? And the way we create that space is we take resources and use it to support the well-being of young people. They don't deserve, nor do we deserve in our community, spaces that teach us or tell us that somehow because of the color of our skin or our economic status that we're less than, or that we're more likely to create or do harm to each other and others, right? So I just encourage all of us to step into a place of radical imagination so we can design the world and the schools that we deserve. We can go to that next slide for us. And then along that line, you know, we've talked a lot about the problem and the experiences that we've had. And we also want to spend some time talking about, you know, potential solutions. And so for this slide, we're talking about the 6 Ds for police-free schools. And D just stands for demands, right? But we're looking to divest and invest. So divest from school policing and exclusionary discipline practices and invest in support services and restorative practices that create safe, high quality schools for all students. We want to decriminalize student behavior by eliminating laws and policies that place youth in contact with the justice system for school related conduct. Deprioritize the use of police in schools by demanding youth-driven policies that focus on prevention, require schools to use alternatives to criminalization, and to use law enforcement only as a last resort. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're just getting a cue from our interpreters to slow down a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Yes, I didn't see the stretch. Okay. Demilitarize or disarm. So we want to demilitarize schools serving students of color by disarming all school police officers and school personnel, including prohibiting all guns, electronic restraints, chemical restraints, and batons. We want to delegitimize. So delegitimize the belief that the presence of police makes schools safer, and advancing the narrative that school policing creates a toxic school climate that places students of color, students at risk of physical harm and contact with the juvenile justice system. And then we want to dismantle. We want to end the relationship between school districts and law enforcement, including ICE, and create sanctuary schools where all Brown, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, non-binary, and immigrant students feel safe from the threat of school-based arrests and physical harm. We're not asking for a lot, y'all. Next slide, please. We're asking for what we deserve.
Thanks for that, Lita. I really want to encourage people. We're going to share this material afterwards, but I want people to reflect on Lita's words, right? We need to engage in radical imagination. They are always going to have the same type of questions and excuses about safety and security. And if you are actually considering helping to transform the school environment, there will be many, many other ways to do it, but you have to use radical imagination, think out of the box, and engage the teacher force, engage the parents, engage the principals, the leadership at the school level, engage community members to think about these solutions. There is no one answer to everything, right? We need to have a multi-level approach, but one thing we need to make sure is that we are all in agreement that there is no room anymore for demilitarization of the schools. There is no room anymore for having guns in the schools. I hear a lot of arguments about SROs are not really police officers, right? When we do know that, police departments choose sworn law enforcement to be placed in the schools. A lot of them are placed in the schools as a punishment because they might be find in some sort of or being accused of criminal behavior of their own. So in order to protect that law enforcement, they actually put it in a school to be protected from it. So, and we're gonna speak a little bit more later around law enforcement or police officers and peace builders. But what we want to highlight is that if you really want to address the issue of criminalization of Black and Brown and Indigenous people at the school setting, there are many, many other ways and obvious ways that are less discriminatory and punitive methods that are addressing school safety and policing and surveillance. We believe, and we have seen in other communities, that safety is found in schools that have positive school climate and support student needs through the guidance of counselors, healthcare professionals, and community peace builders who are trained to identify and address concerns without criminalization. Just to give you an example, Wake County Public Schools keep saying that there is no money to pilot a peace builder program. And then last year, they had a consultant firm from Florida to address safety and security of the schools. And they suddenly find almost $800,000 to pay to this consultant, who it was actually funded and started by a former law enforcement, by a former SRO in Florida. So what do you think their recommendation is gonna be after they do this assessment? What do you think is the recommendation for improving safety and security at the schools when you hire a former SRO and law enforcement to do the assessment without having conversation with the students, without having conversation with the parents? We keep it pushing for that. $800,000, almost $1 million when we had asked for $500,000 for a pilot program for peace builders in a school district that managed $1.8 billion a year. Think about it, 165,000 students, $1.8 billion a year. We asked at one point for 1/10 of 1% of the annual budget. That will give us around $800,000 for a peace builder pilot program. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So if you really want to have an alternative to police in schools, you need to use radical imagination, and you need to actually be willing to think out of the box as you think about these peace builders. So we want the schools to divest from enforcement, and we want from criminalizing Black and Brown families, and invest in intervention workers. Peace builders are community intervention workers, or are intervention workers. We actually are asking for the creation of a new position within the school building, within the schools system, that is a intervention worker, somebody who has the de-escalation technique training, somebody who has restorative justice training, somebody who can coach the whole school community, including teachers, school principal, parents, and students in relationship-centered schools, building the whole school environment and the whole policies and practice around building relationship with that student. That's how you're gonna get to have safer schools and be and reduce the referrals to criminal and juvenile court. I know there are some questions, but I'm gonna walk you through this comparison between a peace builder and a law enforcement in the next slide, and because it's almost the last thing, and then we're gonna engage in more like questions and answers conversation. So the peace builder, right? So we see that they have two different views. The right, on my left actually, because I'm looking at the screen. On the left column, we listed the peace builders, and then the right column, the law enforcement, police officer, sheriff department, or any kind of SRO, somebody who has the power to arrest, interrogate, and handcuff the student, right? That's what we mean by law enforcement. It could be even an armed officer that has somehow been deputized and have the power to arrest the students. So they see their perspective from the law enforcement to the students and families is that those people are trained to see the students and families or the other person as perpetrators, right? Victims or perpetrators. They see them as potential criminals. and they are there to enforce the law, right? Not to consider what is the best for the students in that family. And part of the training even is to profile. Part of the training is profiling. Profiling is a huge aspect of the law enforcement training. And I'm not gonna talk about implicit bias because we can also talk about racism, right? But part of the training is to profile. Who do you think they're gonna think is the criminal when they are actually profiling a potential crime in the school settings? So those are law enforcement. And then a peace builder actually see themselves as an interventionist, somebody who see that student as an individual, as a human being, and see the strengths and potential of the young people and also of their families. So they will approach the student differently because they come in from two different places. When it comes to listening, police officers follow the military-like hierarchy of listening to the superior and following orders, right? That is an essential part of the skills of the law enforcement. Not listening compassionately to better understand a student's need is part of the training, right? They're gonna listen to the superiors and they're not gonna listen to the students because they see the student as a criminal, right? That's what they see the student as. On the other hand, you see the peace builders, they have been trained with listening practices. They have the necessary skills for de-escalating the situation, and and this could include rumors, right? Because there'll be a relationship. Remember earlier I spoke about relationship-centered schools. They have a relationship with the students and with their families and with the whole school community. So they would be better positioned on working on prevention and intervention rather than working on enforcement. And hearing and addressing the youth and the family's concerns is part of the peace building training. When it comes to the tools, police officers are expensive. We even talked to the former captain for the police department in Apex, North Carolina, and he was telling me that actually a law enforcement, a police officer that they place in the school costs the whole school police department almost $250,000 when it comes to all the training, when it comes to all the weapons that they have, when it comes to the cars, technology. So police officers are equipped with guns, and they have chemical spray, tasers, baton, bulletproof vests, handcuff, radio, cars. And for those of you who earlier were a little surprised about having some school districts that have their own police department, like Oakland, Charlotte, I think Mecklenburg County also have their own police department. New York City schools have their own police department. We know that through the 1033 program, some of those police departments, including the school police department, receive military-grade weapons. I'm talking about guns. I'm talking about, grenade launchers. I'm talking about tanks. I'm talking about helicopters. Why does a school police department need a tank or a helicopter? Why? Answer me that question. Well, I guess we're not talking, but, and that is why we keep saying that it is cheaper to work on prevention and intervention. And a peace builder doesn't need all those tools because they're not there to criminalize the school community. They're there to intervene and build a relationship with the student. They only need a cell phone. They need access to email, a laptop, text messages, maybe training on Excel, right? Or other type of data tracking. And they actually connect with the families. The uniform is a big piece, right? And different between police officers and peace builders. Peace builders build dress casual, build like you and I, with a t-shirt even, right? With a shirt, regular shirt. We don't have to have these, uniforms and loaded guns and have all these chemicals and all these things, the budgets and all the military type of uniform that police officers have to have, because we know that doesn't work when you build a relationship with the community, especially with the community that has been criminalized for so long and oppressed. that doesn't work, right? So you don't have to spend money on uniform in the same way. And then the success. Police officers often measure the success by the number of arrests, by the number that have been made in any given month or whatever cycle, by the number of citations that they have given, and by the number of crime reduction, right? Now, some of them are even daring to arrest young people in elementary grades for having some kind of gun with them when they know that they actually had like a pencil sharpener and they took the knife out of that. And that's what they classify as a weapon, right? So when you actually start asking, but what kind of crimes are you preventing? Can you give me the examples? They don't actually want to tell you because often that they create those crimes. As a matter of fact, we didn't include the slideshow here, but other than court referrals for drugs and guns, most of the things that students are referred to criminal juvenile court could be dealt under the student code of conduct. Like all the same type of infractions are addressed under the student code of conduct. They could be dealt with like that under the student code of conduct, but the police officer choose to file charges or press charges against the students because we, like I like to say, the problem for police in the schools is the fact that we have police in the schools in the first place. And that is why educators and administrators use them because we have them in the school building in the first place. With that, I think we're gonna look into the questions. Sorry it took us too long. I know we probably answered some of those questions. I don't know if Lita, Tyler, or anyone else would like to take some of these.
I think there's one that's a common one I could respond to.
And Tyler, do you mind just repeating the question as well for folks who aren't looking at them?
Sure. So if law enforcement is removed from the school, what would prevent outbreaks of violence or assault, like fights or sexual assault? They never prevented them. They existed in schools before they existed in schools when they were there. The whole point of providing supportive, creating a supportive structure of providing the resources that students and teachers need to actually be supported, to even adding to the curriculum, like Jakob said, is to create an environment where those things are far less likely to happen. And this is a good instance. I appreciate that question because it points to how police-free schools is actually an abolitionist concept. So we're saying we want to create a decriminalized space where we're supporting one another. And these things are simply going to be less likely to happen when we actually provide those supports. Instead of spending those millions and millions of dollars on police, we can spend them on things that just make these things less likely to happen. And just to be very succinct, police never stop that anyway. Okay.
Yes, that is a good segue to point out some of the common arguments are that, right, that they would stop school shootings or that kind of things, or to be to mentor students, to be counselors of the students. And what we're proposing is that you remove the police officer from the school building, those police officers that have regular presence in the schools. And if you have to, and that's a decision that the principal has to make, they could be called in, right? But to Tyler's point, we were talking to some former police officers and one former SRO, and they have told us that by training, they cannot approach an active shooter. That's part of the training. You're not allowed to approach an active shooter by yourself. You need to wait for backup. So the waiting time for them to actually approach some situation like that or other type of situation is 3 minutes. There is no research, there is no report that proves that having the police in the building actually will reduce that response time. It is 3 minutes if you call them from outside. It is 3 minutes if the police officer is in the building. So that is to prove that they don't, it's a common myth. And when it comes to building a relationship with the students, maybe, but that's not their place. School counselors, psychologists, nurses, right? In Wake County, they have one nurse for every 2 or 3 schools. We were asking now under the pandemic if they were hiring more nurses. The answer is no. They're not hiring more nurses, right? But yes, they renew the contract between the police department, 4 police departments in Wake County. So if you really want to invest in this and you have the intention to do it, you could do it and you will find the resources.
There was oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say that it looks like there's 2 additional questions that are related to the Peace Builder program. So one in the Q&A is, so are Peace Builders supposed to be everyday people who volunteer and receive training? And then the additional one in the chat was, what is the difference between Peace Builders and mental health support counselors?
Yeah, so for the Peace Builder, and there was another one in the question about, are they everyday people who volunteer? And so we just want to be clear that they would not be volunteered. It would be a paid staff position, right? That would employ someone who could be from the community, because the idea is that this is someone who is well-versed in the community and familiar with some of the circumstances that young people and families experience. So it would be a hired position. We would definitely need buy-in from school and staff, but the way that buy-in can be created, right, is from the district, and clearly articulating the role of what the Peace Builder would be in the school. And then in terms of the other question was about mental health. I done lost it, y'all. What's the difference between Peace Builders and mental health support counselors? So mental health support counselors, right, are trained in a certain modality, right? More in depth to handle issues of mental illness or things that young people are going through. Peace Builders would have a specific type of training that would help them to build relationships with young people. So it could be conflict resolution. It could be transformative or restorative justice. It could be circle keeping. It's about getting them the training that allows them to build relationships within the school. And the premise being, if we create healthy relationships in the school that can transform the school environment, there is a place and an adult or somebody in that space that young people feel comfortable coming to if an issue is bubbling up or has already arisen, right? That then there could be help to, maybe if someone's having a mental health crisis and they're familiar or comfortable with that Peace Builder, they can actually refer them to a mental health counselor that's also in the building. So it's really about shifting the whole environment of schools, right? So that environment is one that creates space for young people to be their full selves, right? And to be supported in whatever is happening in their lives.
Thanks, Letha, and thanks, folks, for chiming in there. I think the other question was from Amanda, and I'm not sure if y'all were able to see that, but how is this research interface with National Dropout Prevention, Trauma Skilled School Virtual Institute that's coming up, and some additional requests about how it's relating to a different conference around dropout prevention. So I think maybe the bigger question is, how is this and the Peace Builder program, how is that related to dropout prevention, as well as sort of like trauma skilled? Like, is this a model that we're seeing elsewhere? And like, what is the sort of national sort of emphasis on these types of programs too? I'm not sure if that's for Fernando or for Tyler or Letha, but maybe just a little bit more on that.
So the model, I'm not, I think Fernando actually pulled the model from some abolitionists in LA, right? So, but the idea of having a person there who actually has relationships with students, and in that way is can act as both preventative and supportive, I think goes deeper into more of an abolitionist lens of what are we doing outside of policing. because we don't want to criminalize. Throughout, we've seen various models throughout the United States. Oakland is one place that recently won, which has a similar model to Peace Builders. I know it's not the same thing, but I don't think we're proposing that police-free schools model should be one size fit all. They should be driven by a parent and student voice, but that they should not involve criminalization. And to the dropout piece, a lot of the I think speak to that. A lot of the research around dropout has to do with actually pointing the finger at the community and at the parents and what do students need when they're in school. Well, Jakob he pretty much outlined what they need in school, and I think what we're asking for is to create environment sanctuaries where students feel safe and feel open. And it's okay for them to have that vulnerability necessary to learn and be creative, as opposed to what do we need to do to just keep them in the school? Because that same a lot of the work around dropouts has also led to school push out. We want our dropout numbers low, so now we're allowing for students to be criminalized because that number doesn't come back to us. So we don't want, I guess the point I'm trying to make is this is more of a grassroots remedy that is focused, that is created with the abolitionist lens and doesn't need to, or really doesn't tie into a lot of the more, a lot of the research that's really going to point the finger at the direction. We're pointing the finger at the carceral state, right? So that's that piece. Of course, we don't want students to drop out, but we think if the demands that Jakob listed were met, that you would have a far lower dropout rate to begin.
And could I just add real quick to that pointing of the finger, right? So even when we talk about structural inequity or structural racism and the way that it shows up within our public school system, people in positions of power are oftentimes more inclined to point it from an individual perspective, as if this isn't something happening systemically. And so we always want to shift it back around, right? And to remind ourselves that these are systemic issues at play that require systemic responses. And it isn't about an individual student or an individual parent's interaction with the school resource officer. It's about the school resource officer program being housed in a school in general that creates structural inequities that target Black and brown students. And so we always have to keep that structural inequity or structural racism, I like to call racism when I see it, at the forefront, and don't allow the system to individualize things. And so.
Yeah, so wow, police departments just for schools, yes. There are about, nationally, about 24 to 25 different school districts who created their own police department. Shout out and recognition to our folks in Oakland who recently were able to win. Huge victory. They were able to, the whole community, they have been organizing for years, but they were able to finally get rid of their Oakland Unified Police Department, a school police department. So basically the whole police department that was created by the school district is gonna be eliminated. Now they're talking about what the alternatives will be as we speak, right? And so the alternative might look different in different places, but yes, there are school districts who have created their own police departments. Now, the question about if law enforcement is removed from the schools, what would prevent outbreaks and violence or assault? The answer is that if they are in the school, they're not preventing anything either. Police in the schools are not preventing any violence or outbreak. We have seen study after study that relationship building, those are schools that actually work on relationship-centered schools for the students, the parents, and the whole family. And I'm talking about engaging the classroom teacher. I'm talking about the leadership. I'm talking about cafeteria workers, bus drivers. I'm talking about crossing guards. I'm talking about all the volunteers, PTA leaders. When the whole community engaged in a conversation about transforming the school environment, they will find the right model that works for that particular school. This is not a one size fits all. It could be a peace builder. It could be a student ambassador program, that they create within the school. It could be all bringing some religious leaders and also coaches and other community members into the school to build those relationships. Only investing in prevention and intervention is gonna actually be effective when it comes to transforming the school environment. And the other thing is that we are advocating for the complete removal of law enforcement that have regular presence in the school building. We're not saying you don't have to call them in, right? If there is a case, but this needs to be a decision that the school principal and vice principal needs to make, right? If you see or suspect of some kind of drugs or something, you can call the police officer outside, but you set the rules, right? They're not coming and telling you what to do. You as the leader of the school community, you as the school community set the rule for when the police officer coming from outside. In Boston, the Student Advisory Council about 6 years ago actually were able to improve the student code of conduct that address drugs for the first time offenses. Those students are not pressed charges against. They're actually referred to some sort of prevention programs, right? Drug prevention programs. So what we are advocating for is more mental health providers and working on the one-on-one basis, right? And address those issues. At the same time, we have seen after time after time that when there's some kind of drug-related issues, Black and brown students are not given any break. They are immediately referred to criminal and juvenile court, but we see white students being given the chance to go to diversion programs. If you go to this diversion program, we're not gonna press charges, right? And we have seen this in Wake County, we have seen it across the state. So what we're talking about here is about who pick and choose what charges they're gonna press against based on that particular person who has that power. And we can talk a lot about implicit bias versus racism at a later time, but that's what it is. If it's racism, call it out.
Appreciate you, Fernando, and I know we're coming up to the end of our time together, so I would like to invite Jakob to give us some closing words and a call to action. I know we're also going to share in the chat a couple of petitions that have been started, one to remove school resource officers from Wake County Public Schools, and if you have not seen the petition or signed, we invite you to do that, as well as one, I think, for Charlotte-Mecklenburg County Schools as well. But Jakob, please end us out right, young man, please.
Thank you. So I just want to say, thank you all for allowing this platform like this for, students to speak. Because it's absolutely needed. And so really quickly, I wanted to address a question. It said, what are some methods that college students can use to advocate for more peace builders and therapists in school settings? Join WCBSC, because yes, we are going for Wake County right now, but we are also welcome. We need members right now to help us out. We're doing so much work outside the protests. We're sending out emails. We're having meetings with the Board of Education. We're emailing principals. We're developing demands. We're doing so many things, and we need as much help as possible. So you can do that by following at WCBSC on Instagram. I'll say that again, WCBSC. And you can, all our information is right there. Thank you so much. And this is a call to action. This Saturday at 11 a.m. Enloe High School, we need to, gather, we need to protest, we need to be there, be there for each other. And we need to support one each other, because when we fight as a community, they have to hear us. We've been silenced way too long. We've been silenced way too long. We've been undermined way too long. They think we're ignorant. They think we're dumb. They think we don't know what we're talking about. I'd say this education is the most educated generation. I would have to say. I would say this generation is the most smartest, the most intelligent, the most creative. We have so much power. We just need to gather together and fight. We need this to happen. So I hope to see you all fighting by my side this Saturday at 11 a.m. Enloe High School. I hope to see you all there. Thank you all so much for this time. We all appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And just quickly, I share in the chat box 2 petitions. If you are also looking for opportunities to take action, Wake County, I shared the petition online for Wake County to end the SRO program, and also for Mecklenburg County. Please sign the petition and share the petition widely as much as you can. Tweet, Instagram, Facebook, put an ad in the newspaper if you could, but get the word out and get these young people, support these young people's petition to remove and demilitarize the schools. Now, Durham, I know that there is a petition, but we don't have a specific link right now, but we're gonna work on that and send it around. Thank you.
And I want to say real quickly, we're we're having signups for the Youth Steering Committee. So basically the Youth Justice Project in Durham for the Southern Coalition of Social Justice. I put that link in there too. Yeah.
All right. Any other lasting comments from our panelists?
Just appreciation for you all for creating this space for us to come and share our work and our demands and the world that we envision for our public school system. So thank you.